Hello everyone and welcome back to the score study video series for the 4 Minutes from Midnight virtual band project. I'm Yoshio Yamashita, I'm the director for the virtual band and I'm also the composer of the symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. This video is going to cover a brief overview of the two oboe parts and do a brief analysis of them, comparing them to the score and looking at some key moments that need some interpretive comments that will hopefully help you when recording your part for this project. Let's begin with looking at letter A in part 1. This is part of the first movement. There's a lot of motion going on at this particular moment if we look at the full score. Piccolo, flute, first clarinet, and first alto sax have a lot of notes when we compare them to the oboe parts. And so what we have to pay attention to here is not rushing. These are quarter note triplets opposed to these later eighth note triplets. So make sure we're counting and subdividing carefully. Make sure this fortissimo comes out opposed to these forte passages. This is one of the themes we talk about in score study video number 4, which is about themes part 2. Continuing on through letter B, again, subdivision, slow practice, culminating in bar 17-18, where you join the flutes and the other winds in this triplet pattern. Then an abrupt cutoff at letter C. Make sure you crescendo into C, but there's no downbeat landing at C. Material at rehearsal D, we cover in score study number 4. If you're interested in looking at interpretation and context for that, please reference that video. At letter F, this is a solo, not soli, because we don't have enough players to do a soli or to have more than one person on first oboe. So just nice, dolce espressivo, singing tones. Pay attention to these triplet figures. They are different from the dotted 8th, 16th figures that we'll see later in the piece, such as at letter G. Second oboe, pay attention to that same figure, the triplet figure, 2 bars before G. Here at letter G, this particular figure in the first oboes is with piccolo and first flute right here, 1 bar after letter G. Second oboe, you'll eventually pick up the 5-lit figure a few bars later. Let's look back at the individual part. Make sure you're subdividing the 5-lit evenly. One of the biggest troubles that people have with odd-numbered tuplets, so 5s, 7s, and even 9s, is that they don't subdivide them correctly and or their fingers make them faster than they need to be. So the tuplet is actually slower than your fingers think it is. And so one of the solutions to that, of course, is slow practice. But within that slow practice, taking a word that has the same number of syllables as the tuplet you're trying to subdivide and using that as a guide to how fast you should be playing those notes in relation to the rhythmic grid of what you're practicing. So for example, for 16th notes, we say 1 E and a, 2 E and a, or 8th notes, 1 and 2 and. So 5-lit, you can use university, geophysical, any other word that has 5 syllables. For 7-lits, again, find a word or a phrase that is 7 syllables long, subdivide as necessary. Pay very close attention to these 32nd note pickups. Be very precise about where those are placed. Again, that's where practicing with a metronome and or the click track comes in handy. At letter H, count your rest carefully. There's a lot of mixed meter and a lot of meter change, so just make sure you're counting appropriately. Again, this passage before letter I is covered in score study number 4. So I'm going to skip over that for now. Letter K, the oboe solo is similar to that came before it. You'll hear a flute solo 2 bars before the your entrance. And what you want to realize is the flute solo is going to have the melody for the first 2 measures, and then you're going to have the melody for the latter 2 measures. So let's just take a look at that real quick in the full score. So just make sure that first you're listening for the flute, and then you're kind of coming in and taking over. Not necessarily taking over as in overwhelming the flute solo, but making sure that you are the prominent melody, because the flute's tessitura is higher than yours at that point, meaning it's playing higher notes. So it's going to naturally project a little more. So just be conscientious there. Again, mind the triplet figure. Make sure second oboe to differentiate it from the dotted 8th, 16th figure later on. The theme at letter L I cover in score study video number 4. So for analysis of that, please reference that video. The content at letter M is much the same. I do cover it in score study video number 1, which is an overview of part 1 of the symphony, movements 1 and 2. This is a rather fanfare-like character, although the melodic line here still needs to be smooth and just very well presented, non-marcato, very legato, but forte. Notice there's no crescendo leading into letter M. That is purposeful. There's an orchestrated crescendo there leading into M, meaning that we add more instruments and more tones. You'll see there's a lot of divisi leading into letter M. So basically we're increasing the mass of sound that's being played by the ensemble. So I didn't necessarily have to write an actual crescendo into the part right there. Letter O is a recap of the theme that's at letter L. Notice that the first oboe has the melody line for about 2 measures, and then second oboe takes the melody and the 3rd bar here. At letter P, the 2 oboe parts are in octaves. Again, this is just a recap of the themes that's at letter L and also at letter O here. Also at letter N here, but that's a horn chorale, so you won't be playing it. Here at letter P, the oboe line is a counter melody or a descant line, whichever you prefer. And so you aren't playing the melody, but it is a direct accompaniment. Of course, it's in A minor / C major, opposed to the previous time that's in C minor / E flat major. Make sure we're decrescendoing these last 2 whole note bars. There isn't a dynamic to which it decrescendos to, but think piano, pianissimo, somewhere in that neighborhood. Letter Q is a euphonium solo and some brass soli. Letter R is a very long flute solo. And so what you need to realize between letters R and S is that while these are beautiful melodic lines that you should be bringing out, they are accompaniment gestures. They aren't the main melody. So let's listen to the line you have here alone, and then we'll listen to it in context. And as with most grace notes, these grace notes do come before the beat. Now let's look at that in context. Slightly after letter R, we're going to start 3 bars before the 3/4. So just remember, this is an accompaniment figure, though it is a very beautiful melodic line, and so you should bring it out, especially since this is only 2 players playing this. Letter S, you are playing the same line as the first horn, and I believe the third horn. Let's check that, make sure I'm not lying. Yes, you're playing the same line as the first alto sax and the first and third horns, which again is a descant or counter melody to the melody that was introduced during the flute solo at letter R. We have a very long and drawn out cadence at the vocal retard, which finishes here at the odd tempo. Again, this is another descant line. You are mostly in octaves until bar before T. And then there's one last first oboe solo. I didn't mark it solo because I assumed at this point one person would be playing this part. That is in conjunction with the first horn, meaning that you are playing the same thing. So let's take a look at that very quickly at letter T. And that closes the first part, or the first 2 movements of the symphony. If you're planning to watch this video in 2 parts, you can pause the video here. If not, I'm going to continue on to part 2. I'm going to take this moment to do a brief plug. While I'm not going to distribute the full score as a PDF, the condensed score is available as the visual for the condensed score video that is released on the YouTube channel. If you're interested in looking at how your part fits into the rest of the piece a little more deeply and looking at the score in a little more detail, I'm not using the condensed score here because I prefer using the full score for some of these videos. However, the condensed score is available, and I do highly suggest that you go and check that out if you're interested in it. Now we're going to look at part 2 of the symphony, which covers movement 3 and movement 4. As you'll see, the opening is mainly comprised of runs, trills, and fanfare type figures. Fanfare type figures like the dotted 8th, 16th, and these ascending quarter note lines should be marcato, accented. All of these runs, one of the tendencies with runs is you're going to try to make them faster than they need to be. So practice with a metronome and practice slowly. Again, it's a little slower at molto agitato, about 10 beats a minute slower. Attack the sforzando. Don't decrescendo. This mezzo forte is subito mezzo forte. At letter B, there will be a timpani roll for 2 bars. That's these 2/4/4 bars. Then the piccolo has a solo beginning at this 3/4 bar. From B onward a little bit is kind of a development section of one of the themes that we covered in score study number 4, or yes, score study number 4, themes part 2. So if you're interested in looking kind of deeply at the analysis of that particular theme, I'd suggest checking that out. However, let's look at some of the context of that phrase. So what we're doing here is we're building onto the chorale phrase in segments. So first the piccolo, and then we add some of the remaining winds, and then move to the horns and bassoons. So as you can see, that chorale theme will be the subject of most of the third movement. This line at the 2/4 bar, this figure, no one else in the ensemble has it. So while it's marked mezzo piano, bring that out. So more of a mezzo piano, mezzo forte. The section here at C through D, ending at E, is more or less a recap of what happens at letter B, except it's transposed to the key of E flat minor. Please mind your accidentals: B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, and C flat, especially G flat and C flat. First oboe, if you take a look at the 4/4 bar after letter D, you should lean on this tied quarter note. This is just kind of your garden variety of suspension and resolution. However, it's important in that I believe you're the only person that has that. You're the only, you are with the third clarinet there, and you're the only people that have it. And you're the only one that has it in that particular octave. So it is important that we hear that. Let's listen to that. Letter E is a recap of the theme we heard introduced by the flute solo at letter R in part 1. However, now it's in F minor opposed to C minor. First oboe, you have this kind of flowery descant line with the first flute and first clarinet, and I believe the first alto sax. Now it's just you, first flute and first clarinet. Second oboe has a different descant line. So let's listen to these together, and then we'll listen to them in context. And now let's listen to those in context here. Letter F is a brass chorale. Again, make sure you're counting the rest accurately. The remainder of this chorale is much the same as its previous occurrences. Again, that's covered in score study video number 4. The fermata before G, you'll hear a piccolo solo. At the downbeat of G, you'll hear a timpani hit. And then if you watch the conductor video, I will cue in this 4/4 bar. So that's something to watch for when you're watching the conductor video. If you haven't done so already, I do highly recommend you do that, as it also has the click track, which you'll be playing with when you record your videos. The theme here at letter G is the hymn theme, which is covered a little more in depth in score study video number 3, which is themes part 1. So if you're interested in that, please go check that video out if you haven't already. Letter H is a direct copy and paste recapitulation from the beginning of part 2. So I'm going to skip over that, as all the same advisories, warnings, and comments apply. The next time both of the oboe parts play is here 4 bars after L, or 4 bars before M, whichever you prefer. Make sure we're observing these dynamics: mezzo forte, crescendo to forte by beat 3, or in first oboe's case, beat 4. And then forte piano all the way up to forte. All of these trills are fast trills. So make sure we're putting an appropriate density of notes within each trill. Trills do carry through ties. This figure that says bring out refers to this figure right here, leading all the way up to this rest. That doesn't apply to the rest, or this fanfare figure, or the figure that comes after. Again, this trill holds through the bar line and into the first bar of N. This fanfare type figure is very important and will come back later. First oboe, you have this trill with the flutes, the first flutes, and second oboe, you have this fanfare figure with the second flutes. Again, this is just a descending chromatic scale. Remember to place the sforzando on the first beat and decrescendo down to piano. Second oboe, mezzo forte down to pianissimo. Pianissimo does not mean that we don't want to hear you anymore. We still want sound there. We just want it to be very quiet. The same thing here, first oboe in the 2 bars before O. Again, it isn't marked pianissimo, but it's assumed pianissimo, pianissimo, even just something much quieter than piano where you started. At letter P, ignore these annotations. We don't have enough players to warrant using them. This is a simple fanfare type figure that we'll hear reprised in the trumpets at letter R later down the line. The chorale that appears at P again reappears at letter Q. Letter Q, we're seeing a lot more of these fanfare type figures like we saw at letter M. Again, these trills are fast trills. Triplets are marcato. Dotted 8/16ths are also marcato. Count and subdivide on the runs, 6s, 5s, the 7s here, 7s in second oboe as well. Simply make sure that we're subdividing them and we're not making them faster than they actually are. That makes more work for the people editing the audio once you submit your videos, but also it makes more work for you because you're playing the notes faster than they need to be if you're rushing the tuplets. Letter R, second oboe, you have the melody. First oboe, you still have these runs. And then both first and second oboe have melody, harmony in these last 4 bars. The 2/4 bar leads us into the coda, where you're in octaves, then in unison for this final fanfare type figure, and then again in octaves to the end at fortissimo. Notice the legato marking on the 8th note at the end. This 8th note is not short. It is not a stinger at the end of a Sousa march. It should be played long and held out for its full value. And that's the end of the analysis for part 2 and the end of the analysis for the oboe parts for the Symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. Hopefully this video is helpful as you prepare your interpretations for the video recordings for the project. If you have questions or comments about the analysis presented here in this video, you can email at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com, or you can contact us if you have other parts of your part that you'd like to see us cover in a future score study video. Thanks for watching.